So the Sound Money Defense League is a national public policy group. So we're based in the United States and North Carolina. And what we found is that the greatest impediment to people using gold and silver as money is not innocuous esoteric things like legal tender status, or it's not that there's better money out there. The reason that we can't use gold and silver as money today, Gresham's law, of course, but also there are countless regulations and disincentives and taxes keeping people from actually being able to use money. Right now, in some states, if you're to buy precious metals, you're charged a sales tax. When you sell your precious metals, obviously, in many states, you're hit with a capital gains tax. And then in the US, you're charged again on the federal level as well. So in some cases, gold and silver is subject to triple taxation in the United States. So we have found that taxes are the greatest impediment to doing this, so our priority has largely been in removing the taxes that stand in the way of people being able to transact in gold and silver. We're a project of Money Metals Exchange, a precious metals online dealer based in the US. So we'll start with a basic idea of what sound money is and why this is important. Simply, sound money is money that's subject to market forces. This is money that has been tested by the market over a period of time and has retained its value. This is important because it serves two important features. This is what we want out of our money. The first is that it allows individuals and businesses and governments to plan for the future. Being able to plan on a multi-decade horizon allows for the infrastructure required for human prosperity to be built. This is not something that can be done when your money is radically devalued. This is not something that can be done when you don't know what the value of your money will be worth a month, a year from now. So it's an incredibly important part for money, for communities, for civilization to be able to plan into the future. The second value proposition that sound money provides is that it acts as a defense or a prophylactic against a government that would otherwise swell and expand. The American government, at least, has shown no propensity or no capacity for shrinking or for becoming smaller. Today is Inauguration Day, a day many are exciting because we're turning the page and there's this hope that what if Trump actually does all of the things he says he'll do? But Trump's first administration, and of course all of the other administrations, have given us very little hope to believe that there's any political will, any real political will, to actually shrink the size of government. So more than Doge, sound money provides a better check on government than Doge or any government agency ever could. These barriers, these guardrails that keep governments from fighting wars of choice for decades around the world the way America has. Guardrails that keep this bureaucracy from bloating and becoming what it is today. This is why sound money is important. And those are the two main value propositions to sound money. And of course, we've got the countless quotes from the Austrian economists, from the free market economists, from gold standard advocates, Ludwig von Mises being a famous one, F.A. Hayek being a Nobel Prize winning economist who also wrote on not just sound money, but the importance of decentralizing money. What if money didn't have to be tied to a nation? What if we denationalized it and treated it like any other good? So these are kind of the ideas that we're coming into the fore with. The idea that, one, the money that we have today is not the money that we'll have 100 years from now. I'm not betting that the US Federal Reserve note will exist 100 years from now. But it also doesn't have to be this way. We can create alternatives and reimagine what good money looks like. Of course, we know that the monetary dysfunction that we're faced with today in the United States and Canada and generally all over the world is largely a product of federal mismanagement. This is the federal level, on the administrative level, in the executive and in Congress, of course, but also the Federal Reserve itself. Now, we know that the issues largely stem from this top level, but that doesn't mean that there aren't things that states themselves can do to protect themselves or to mitigate some of this damage that comes from the federal level. Like I mentioned earlier, taxes are such a huge part of this. You cannot use gold and silver as money today. You go into a grocery store to buy eggs with gold and silver. If on the off chance that the clerk takes it, you then have to track your cost basis. What did I buy this eagle at? What's gold worth now? And you're doing this for every single time you make a transaction. It's simply unfeasible. So taxes are such a huge part of this, and so we're going state to state removing taxes, of course, but it's not just taxes. There are also things that states can do to help incentivize investors of gold and silver. For example, states are introducing legislation to establish bullion depositories in the state. These are states that are introducing and passing legislation that allows for the state to invest in physical gold. For example, just Utah earlier this year, 2024 now, passed legislation that allowed for a $180 million investment, that the state treasurer is allowed to invest $180 million worth of state funds in physical gold held within the state. This is a huge deal. There are very few states that own a single ounce of gold. Texas famously opened a depository 10 years ago. They built one, but even they divested from that position. The only reason they built that depository was because they already had $1 billion worth of physical gold stored in their teacher pension funds. They didn't want to continue paying carrying costs and paying storage costs to banks in New York, so they decided we're going to build a depository and bring that metal back to be stored in Texas. The idea is a state depository can act as a defense against federal overreach. We've heard so many people talking, and a panel I was on with Lynette Zhang yesterday, talking about the importance of confiscation and the history of confiscation. As you may know, in 1933, FDR signed an executive order confiscating America's gold, making it illegal for Americans to own gold. The idea that this could happen again is not completely unheard of. And so states are actively protecting themselves against what they see as an oncoming federal overreach. So it's things like this. It's things like investing in pension funds and state funds. It's issuing gold bonds or investing in gold bonds. There are all of these creative ways that financially we can introduce gold and silver back into the system in ways more than are just simply transactional. In 2024, we had the most successful legislative year of our history. I've been doing this. The Sound Money Defense League has been around for 11 years now. And it's such a far cry to see what we have here, which is what? 7, 14, 21, 6, 27 states here that introduced legislation. More than half of the United States is actively considering how to reintroduce gold and silver back into the lives of their individuals, of their citizens, but also of their state governments. In 2017, I have vivid memories of drafting a bill that would allow a state to invest state funds in gold and silver. Not a bunch, not the entire state fund, of course. You're talking about 1% of your holdings, a couple of $1 million of your holdings, which as a question of state balance sheet, this is not a significant amount. At the time in 2017, gold was $1,200 an ounce, and these legislators didn't give us the time of day. Many of them laughed. Financiers and bankers would come out to hearings to argue against the bill and why it's important that states not hold gold because they would rather be holding third world debt or these other assets that in many cases have a negative real rate of return. Because that is the mindset of the typical investor, the typical financier today. You're chasing yield, and when you're chasing yield, safety of principal, counterparty risk, those things fall to the wayside because you're trying to chase returns. And a state should be thinking farther than chasing yield. They should be thinking about the environment that they're creating for states, for citizens, for the businesses in that state for years to come. So it's very exciting that we're seeing more states than ever introduce legislation like this. States are introducing legislation, when we started this 10 years ago, it was mostly me. It was this very small thing. There weren't a lot of action being taken place on this issue. It was one state at a time that was passing one, and then maybe 2 states the next year would introduce and one would pass. And now we're here, where states are introducing legislation. Sometimes I'm finding out after the fact. It's not even just us anymore because state legislators themselves, of course, and the individuals in the state are calling for this. They want this. They go to the grocery store and see that, wait, I can't buy what I used to. Home ownership is completely shut. The door has been completely shut on so many Americans. They realize that their dollar is withering, and that's not an act of God. It's not an accident. This is policy. This is an intentional choice by the government to devalue America's money. The worldwide global reserve currency is being actively devalued, and that has to end. We've come to recently, a big topic of conversation is de-dollarization. We see it a lot in conversations that have to do with BRICS countries. These are countries that you could say, have an adversarial relationship to the United States, and they are making sure that they consider what their holdings are, they consider what transactions, what their final settlement can be done in. And of course, some of these countries, China, Russia, India, some of these countries have a vested interest in finding out what alternatives they have, not necessarily because the dollar, or rather, because the dollar doesn't work for them. Because in many cases, they wanted to transact, and because of political will, because of sanctions, because of blocking out of SWIFT systems, these countries are looking around and saying, wait, what other options do we have? We can't base our entire financial system based on the political will of a country that is very excited and very happy to go into war by choice when they want to, very happy to use their money and their political power to help their friends and to hurt their enemies. And so sure, countries like Russia and countries like China have an interest in buying gold and have an interest in stockpiling their gold. But it's not just these countries, and it's not just enemies of the United States. States themselves, individuals, state governments are saying, wait, hang on, we own way too much in dollar-denominated assets. The idea is to reduce volatility in market drawdowns, to reduce counterparty risk, of course, to reduce a debt default risk. We need to be looking at gold and silver too. It's not just Russia, it's not just China, it's Wyoming, it's Tennessee, it's Utah. These are states that are also, aside from passing and introducing legislation that allows their state treasurer to invest in state funds, because in many cases that's not allowed. Just a peek behind the curtain. In the United States, most state treasurers, most states have a list of permissible investments. There are X amount of things that the state is allowed to invest in, and if it's not on this list, you can't invest in it. Gold and silver, unsurprisingly, are not on this list in the vast majority of states. So we're having to go through legislatively and say, wait, so even if your state treasurer wants to own gold and silver, they by rule cannot? This should not be the case. So these states are introducing and passing legislation that call for gold and silver to be held within the state. In some cases, this is a dollar amount, up to $10 million in an investment. In some cases, this is as a percentage of the state fund, which could be up to many millions. So states are actively considering this stuff too. I know that some people don't like to talk about Trump, but today is a special day in that there is an inauguration happening in Washington, D.C. today, and it begs the question, what can he actually do? First, I guess the bigger question is there any political will to do any of these things? But to the extent that Trump can actually affect change for sound money, here are the things that we should give him. Of course, in 2016, Trump, on the campaign trail of his first administration, he was very favorable towards gold, making multiple comments about how tying the dollar back to gold would be great. It would be great for the economy, great for businesses. And now we're seeing him kind of do that same thing with Bitcoin. He has taken this asset who he believes can help him because these are politically expedient people. To be sure, these are politicians. Right now, the crypto crowd is the one that helps him. In 2016, he was doing deals with precious metals dealer where he was paying rent in physical gold. He was talking about how great gold was. So to the extent, with the hope being that Trump actually believes any of this stuff that he's saying about gold, here's some federal legislation that we've worked on and that we hope he'll support. The first is the Tax Neutrality Act. Like I mentioned, the single biggest impediment to people using gold and silver as money is the transactional friction in taxes. To eliminate the federal tax on capital gains would be doubly effective. One, because first you would eliminate that tax, but also the only reason that most states tax capital gains is because most states start with your federal AGI, and that number gets pulled straight down. So if you remove this tax from the federal level, in most cases you'll be removing it from the state level as well. So this would be a huge, huge victory for the use of gold and silver as transactional currency. This currently in the United States, gold and silver is subject to a long-term capital gains rate of 28%. It's impossible to make money as an investment when the state is taking 7% when you buy the asset, 4.5% when you sell the asset, and then the federal government is going to come in and take another 28%. It's not feasible. So this is a very powerful thing that Trump or Congress could do to allow for the reintegration of gold and silver as money. The next is the Gold Transparency Act. By the way, this legislation and the legislation on the prior slide, these are a legislation that have been introduced. We've been working in DC with Congress people on this legislation. The Gold Transparency Act calls for an audit of America's gold. America's gold hasn't been credibly audited in decades. There was, during the Eisenhower administration, what quote unquote is what they called an audit, made for TV spectacle, where they brought in the politicians with cameras and TV cameras, and they let them hold bars, and they showed them the wall of bars, but there was not a single assay, there was not a single matching of serial numbers. There was in no way a meaningful assay that took place here. And so there's a lot of talk about Fort Knox, and if we ever reestablish a gold currency, could we peg it to the gold in Fort Knox? Maybe, if it's there. I don't know that it's there, no one does. But let's assume that it is for a second. We'll take them on their word. Sure, the gold is there. Is it encumbered? Who owns it? Is it leased or swapped? The IMF? China? Who actually owns the gold in there? We have no idea. And gold is among the basket of items that are incredible reserve assets, underground minerals, oil, gold. The rest of the world being unsure, and American citizens being unsure about whether America's reserves are actually there, it's asking for a cry of public confidence. These people can't be trusted. They've shown no reason to be trusted. And now they want you to take their word that the gold is there and that it's full ownership and that the United States owns it all. I don't buy it. So this audit needs to take place. It's an incredibly important audit. Lastly, I want to make the point about how the last 11 years of the Sound Money Defense League doing this and all of the other people that work on this issue to remove the disincentives that stand in the way of people using gold and silver as money is to create an environment where entrepreneurs and innovators can come in and create. We're seeing more than we've ever seen before. We're seeing fractionalized metal. We're seeing tokenized metal. We're seeing really clever things like collateralized gold, being able to store your gold with someone and taking out a line of credit against your gold in cases where you don't want to liquidate the asset, of course, but you might need money. Right now, America credit card household rates are at an all-time high. America is living on debt. So these clever ways to reintroduce or to reintegrate gold and silver through the form of, for example, gold backs or small transactional tokens, these items that are good for barter, these items that are tokenized or digital, all of these things creates an environment that makes the Federal Reserve and it makes the stewards of America's money say, we need to shape up, because on a long enough timeline, the survival rate of all paper money is 0. Every single one of them dies. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So America's stewards can continue doing what they're doing. They continue to weaponize and pervert the global reserve currency, or they can get their act together or be displaced by a BRICS currency or a gold-backed private currency or Bitcoin or whatever comes next. But ultimately, it's up to the United States. They get to decide where we go from here. I'm not necessarily hopeful that our politicians have the answers to these questions. That's why it's important that we make them. This is a grassroots movement. The reason that we're able to pass legislation in states and working in DC is not because I'm up there with a suit telling them that they should do this. It's a grassroots movement, and it requires people in the state contacting their state legislators. In Washington, D.C., you don't have power. That's just the truth of it. You can make a call if you want. You can get an aide. They might take your number down. They might take your message. It might eventually get up to the congressman. But there's no real power there for the individual. But that's not true on the state level. In Nashville, in Newark, in Bismarck, North Dakota, you have power there as an individual. 5 phone calls, 5 emails to a state capital like that, and they realize that they've got fire on their hands. This is what it takes. It requires a community, a Sound Money community of people willing to do this grassroots work. So thank you everyone very much for being here. I encourage you to be an active participant in this Sound Money war that we are currently a part of. And here's my contact information. You can find us at soundmoneydefense.org. You can find the Sound Money Index, which, sorry, I didn't mention, but is a project that we put out every year. It's a yearly scorecard where we rate all 50 states by their pro or anti-sound money policies to determine which state has the best environment for people wanting to invest or use or start a company regarding or using sound money. So you can find that on the Money Metals website. You can find me on Twitter there. And I'll be around for the rest of the day. So if anyone has any questions or anything, I'm available. Thank you very much for listening and being here.